Hey everyone, Tony D with another screenwriting tips. This is going to be part 2 of my talent vacuum theory, sort of an extension of that. So I'll put a link in the description from the previous video. And this is just more pontification of where the talent is going in Hollywood and where it's not going. So, in the previous video, I talked about the talent vacuum and how basically, because of technology, you don't have to physically be in Hollywood to necessarily be a part of the movie industry anymore. And that lack of location will become less of a factor as time goes on. All right? So that's a rough summary of what I said. So continuing on with that, there is another factor that I think is intruding upon why talented people aren't going to Hollywood and why you're seeing a degradation of movies and television. Now, there's the mediums themselves that are being, I don't want to say destroyed, but they're being greatly changed by the internet. There's that. And that's a huge factor, not to discount that. But there is this idea of woke Hollywood, right? So, which is, I think, exacerbating the problem. It's not the cause of the problem. It's an exacerbation of that, right? So if you look at politics and the Democrats and the Republicans, to some degree, those two factions balanced each other out. So you had Democrats and liberals on one side who would say to Republicans, you're too conformist, you're too stuck in your ways, try something different. And then on the other side, you had the Republicans who would say stuff like, no, you're gone too far, you're going to unravel everything, pull it back. And that was sort of the dichotomy. So you have a similar dichotomy in the entertainment industry. The division is the talent and the money, right? The money people and marketing people, the corporate people. And the corporate people keep the talent in check by saying, no, that's too crazy or that's too expensive or whatever. And the talent people keep the corporate people going by coming up with the crazy ideas that explode and make millions of dollars. Now you have a situation in which wokeness has entered the field, and it's not enough to have a crazy idea. And understand that traditionally, money people were more like Republicans, and talent people were more like the liberals or Democrats. So that was a tradition for, I'd say, a good 50 years. You know, if you were an actor or a writer, chances are you were on the left side of politics. You were kind of a weird, quirky person. Maybe you lived an untraditional lifestyle. Maybe you were divorced 2 or 3 times, or you never got married at all, or you know, you might be, you know, and I'm talking in the past, you might be part of a community that wasn't considered traditional, like you might be gay or whatever. So the money people were all business people, and they tended to be very traditional. They tended to be married. They tended to be boring, but there was sort of an acknowledgement from that side that they needed talent. They needed these weirdos to make the crazy stuff, and there was somewhat of a respect. I wouldn't say it was total, but there was at least an acknowledgement that, yeah, you know, if you're going to make rock and roll music, you need one of these long-haired weirdos. If you're going to make, if you're going to sell paintings, you need a guy who, sits up in his loft, tearing his hair out, throwing paint at the walls, and living like a maniac, smoking nonstop and taking drugs or whatever. That is starting to break down because of the wokeness. Because of the wokeness, it's the money people who have been sort of infected by progressivism. And I say infected because they're not really progressives. They've just decided, well, that's the trend, and that's cool, and I want to be cool too, so I'm going to be woke, and the company's going to be woke, and our projects are going to be woke, and it's going to be awesome. But that leads to an imbalance, because now it's the business people who are taking wild chances and doing strange things. But they don't understand the process of the creative part because they're money people. They don't do that with their money. They just do it with entertainment projects because they feel that's what needs to be done. But this is why you have, so for instance, they're revamping Saved by the Bell. And the big announcement is, oh, there's a major character that's trans. But that's a problem because, and it's not that there's anything wrong with putting a trans person in a TV show. Don't misunderstand me. But the problem is this. Saved by the Bell is not meant to be a show that is aimed at a tiny minority of viewers. It's meant to be a as broad as possible sitcom. So it should be reflective of the audience. And only a tiny minority of the audience is trans, so therefore making a trans character creates an imbalance in the show for a couple of reasons. Number one is when Hollywood does a trans character, they tend to make it a character that you can see as trans. That's number one. So if they hire a trans woman, they're not going to hire a trans woman who looks almost indistinguishable from a biological woman. That would almost defeat the purpose. See, for them, they want everybody to see there's a trans character. If you can't see that they hired a trans character, they don't get any virtue points. So they instead will cast a trans woman who looks more like a boy or a gender neutral person. So that's not even representative necessarily of the trans community. That might be representative of a more, well, gender neutral community or non-binary community. So they're not even accomplishing what they set out to do because it's not important to them to do that. It's only important for them to get the virtue points and to get the nod from the audience because they also think, well, this is hot now. So obviously we're going to get tons of viewers from it. But the reality is you're not, because the trans community will look at that and go, well, she's not necessarily trans, or that's confusing, or that doesn't represent me. And the rest of the community just looks at it in this woke era as, oh yeah, you're trotting out the latest member of a marginalized group just to have on the show. So you end up pleasing no one. And in that process, you drive away audience. And the talent who you would normally rely on to make these decisions don't make the decisions. See, the talent on Saved by the Bell, the writers, the producers, the directors, and even the actors, they might look at Saved by the Bell and say, well, it's a broad comedy. If we're going to have a trans character, there's nothing wrong with that, but we wouldn't necessarily make her or him the main character. We might have an episode where there's a trans character in it, because that would be more representative of the audience. Whereas if you were doing a sitcom about a trans person, you would have lots of trans people in it, because that's what the series would be about, and that would be more of a balance both creatively and with your message. So don't get on me for the trans thing. It's just an example I'm trying to explain. So in this process of having the money people meddle with the product, you are going to create a situation in which the talent no longer get to be talent. They're just people who are saying, hey, wait a minute. Now I have to be the traditional guy and turn around to you money people and go, no, you've gone too far. I'm the one supposed to present you with a crazy idea. You're not supposed to present me with the crazy idea, because as a creative person, my crazy idea has a creative point. Your crazy idea is only based on marketing and corporate stuff and stuff you saw on other TV shows. It's not a decision that resonates or will work 9 times out of 10. So you have these, this is why you get, I think, the rise of Skywalker. So you've got this, and more so, The Last Jedi and other movies who have gone super, super woke, because you have the money people now saying, oh, you got to include this, that, and the other thing, and make sure it's super, super woke, because that's what the kids are into these days. At the same time, you have the rise of the anti-woke on YouTube. And these anti-wokers, I call them, are also talent that could have been part of that system. They could have been the guys in the studio or in the production company saying, no, this is going to be terrible. Don't do this. Let's modify it. You know, we could have marginalized groups in our product, but let's put them in context so they make sense, and so you don't end up, you know, exploiting this marginalized group just as a trend, and also so we don't alienate our core audience. So, for instance, if you look at James Bond, and they're doing this whole female James Bond, woman of color, whoa! It's alienating their core audience, which is, I guess, you know, it's a lot of men, but also a lot of women who want to see James Bond do James Bond stuff, not some woman, or you know, whether she's a person of color or not, just horn in on the action, so to speak. So again, you're going to end up pleasing no one in that circumstances, because you distance the core audience, and you have this weird assumption that just because you put a woman of color in place of James Bond, women of color are suddenly going to go start seeing James Bond, when maybe they don't traditionally do that. That's an assumption you can't really back up with any evidence. And it's a bit of a racist assumption when you think about it. Like, you know, just because I'm Italian doesn't mean I'm going to see every Italian movie. Yeah, I like gangster movies, but not all gangster movies are Italian. And not all Italian movies are going to be good just because there's an Italian person in it. I mean, Righteous Kill. So the anti-woke not only aren't in your studio moderating your wokeness where they should be, they're actually outside of it working against you, making YouTube videos like this one, saying, you idiots, you're not doing what you should be doing. You're not moderating your message. You're not coming to the center for the message. The center where you should be, especially if you're doing something to appeal to a wide audience. And I'm talking about messages, not necessarily the product as a whole. So if you look at something like Joker goes to a very dark and weird place that a lot of people were avoiding. But you could see the great success of Joker and how, you know, it's become an important movie. People are talking about it. And yet, woke Hollywood insisted this was going to be a movie that hurt people, that was terrible, and, you know, you should go see it. That is not the job of the money people. Their job is not to say, don't go see movies. Their job is to say, see movies, we love you. And instead, because they're so consumed by this woke message, they're actually working against their own interest, and the people calling them out are now outside the studio with their own audiences calling Hollywood out. And that is just leading to the more degradation, because who's left to make the movies? At this point, it's a lot of legacy people. And what I mean by legacy is the sons and daughters of movie industry people who are already rich and aren't necessarily talented. No offense, rich people, but if you haven't come up using your talent, you aren't necessarily, you're actually at a disadvantage, let's say, because a person who has been forced to hone their talent has been forced to make it work or quit. You, rich people who are already in the industry because your parents are, you're not forced to ever quit because you have a bankroll and mommy and daddy will just clear a path for you. Now, that's not everybody. So you look at a guy like Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage has made a great career for himself. There are other examples. Jason Reitman. Can't think of any off the top of my head. But I can think of a bunch who I know behind the scenes who suck. And they're terrible. I will talk about a terrible one without mentioning names. There was a terrible Legacy. I'll just call the person Legacy. And they were working to make comic books. And they had a very famous last name because their parentage was extremely famous in a particular genre. They made terrible comics. And on top of that, terrible business. Everything they did was terrible. They did everything wrong in comics and pissed off everybody they met because they started with the premise, I should be great and my comics well received because of my name. That's the problem with the legacies. They don't understand you have to earn your place. You don't just get it. You don't just waltz in. You earn it by paying your dues. The rich, a lot of times they don't pay their dues. Depends on how they were raised. Some of them do. Nicolas Cage paid his dues. He changed his name. And he worked hard and he built a career. And you could say, well, he had a leg up. He did. But still, he went a lot further. And he's in a slightly different area than the rest of his family. In case you don't know, he's a Coppola. So anyhow, that is the continued dissolution of the vacuum theory of talent. The talent vacuum theory. More talent is not only leaving Hollywood, but working against it and criticizing it. Can Hollywood reverse the process? It could, if it was willing to say, you know what? We effed up, and we need some new blood, and we got to go out there and discover it. But as more legacies take over the mechanisms of Hollywood, the distribution and the money, they're less likely to do that because they don't want to share that money. They don't want strangers to be brought in because those talented strangers tend to be scary. It won't be until they're forced to do it that the money's so bad, like, oh, we need talent, that they have to go on the internet and find talented people. Unfortunately for them, by that time, you know, you look at all these YouTube channels, they have millions of followers. If I have millions of followers, what do I need to go to Hollywood for? Think about that. Yeah. If you got 1 million followers, you're on your own. You're an institution yourself. Hollywood is, the only thing you're going to use Hollywood for is to get more followers from them, from their audience. And, when you look at the Golden Globes and how Ricky Gervais just smashed them with one monologue, you realize it's kind of a paper tiger. It's kind of a bunch of rich people, who don't have much but their money at this point. Anyhow, the talent vacuum continues. I hope you use your talent, screenwriters, to make something cool. Because out here on the internet, anything is possible.